If Tywin Lannister had survived the events of Season 4, the political landscape of Westeros would have shifted dramatically. Tyrion's desperate act, fueled by betrayal and resentment, would either have been thwarted by a last-minute intervention or some small miscalculation. Had that happened, Tywin, wounded but alive, would emerge with a renewed focus on restoring Lannister authority. His survival would not be a quiet affair. The news would spread quickly through the Red Keep, unsettling the already shaky foundations of King's Landing. The small council, reeling from the chaos that ensued after Joffrey's death and Tyrion's trial, would find its center of gravity pulled back toward Tywin's stern figure. Cersei, who had believed for a brief, horrifying moment that she had lost her father, would be reminded once more of his dominance. Jaime, still conflicted, would attempt to navigate this new reality, caught between loyalty to his father and complicated feelings toward Tyrion. Tyrion himself, the would-be kinslayer, would be a fugitive unlike any other. Instead of successfully fleeing across the narrow sea, he would find himself trapped in a city where the most powerful man in Westeros wanted him captured and brought to justice. Varys's careful plans might unravel. The Spider, faced with Tywin's survival, would need to reevaluate the worth of helping Tyrion escape. Without the powerful shock of Tywin's death to destabilize the regime, Varys might choose a safer route, carefully distancing himself from Tyrion. The Imp's escape could still occur, but it would be far more perilous, with heightened searches, gold cloaks patrolling every alley, and heightened scrutiny at the docks. In this alternate course, Tywin would lean on his impeccable ability to restore order. He would demand the obedience of every lord who had entertained even the faintest doubts about Lannister strength. The Tyrells, who had begun to press for more influence, would face a staunch and unyielding Tywin. His survival would harden him, making him even less tolerant of insubordination. Marjorie's ambitions, carefully guided by Olenna, might be forced to take a more subtle route. Without the vacuum left by Tywin's death, their attempts to bind Tommen more tightly under their sway would meet the cold calculation of a grandfather who was not content to let his grandson be molded by another family's agenda. Meanwhile, in the north, the Boltons would have to reassess their standing. With Tywin alive, their claim to the wardenship of the north retains the crown's support. Tywin would ensure that Roose Bolton maintained an iron grip over the remnants of the Stark lands, at least until the north could be properly subdued. This would leave fewer opportunities for the northern lords, still loyal to the Stark name, to plot revolts. The instability that might have followed a leaderless Lannister regime would be replaced by a firm hand, leaving fewer cracks for rebellion to fester. Peter Baelish, lurking in the Vale and manipulating events around Sansa Stark, would need to be more cautious. Tywin's survival meant he would have to factor in a formidable figure who could still unite the crown's forces against any perceived threat. Littlefinger's careful manipulations to provoke chaos would be more constrained by the presence of Tywin, who despised chaos for its own sake. While Baelish might still maneuver in shadows, he would know that a living Tywin Lannister would not tolerate the kind of open-ended uncertainty that allowed Littlefinger's ambitions to flourish. Across the sea, Daenerys Targaryen's progress in Meereen would not be directly influenced by Tywin's survival, but the eventual response from Westeros would. Under a weaker regime, one might expect a divided kingdom to ignore the growing queen across the sea or fail to present a united front. But Tywin's survival ensures that the crown would still have the organizational strength to respond to foreign threats, or at least plan for them. Even if Daenerys' invasion plans were still years away, the existence of Tywin Lannister would ensure that when the time came, the Seven Kingdoms would not be so easily toppled by a foreign claimant with dragons. In King's Landing itself, the day-to-day atmosphere would be markedly different. The court might remain tense and fearful, with Tywin's presence always felt. There would be fewer brazen attempts at manipulating the boy King Tommen, as everyone understood that behind his gentle demeanor stood the stern hand of Tywin. Lancel Lannister, who harbored his own secrets and guilt, would be terrified at the idea that Tywin might discover the extent of Cersei's indiscretions. The Faith, emboldened in later seasons by a power vacuum, would think twice before openly challenging the crown. Tywin, a realist, would understand the power of the Faith but would never allow them to gain the upper hand that they did later on. he would make certain that the High Sparrow never emerged as a force capable of bending the monarchy. Instead of giving room to religious fanaticism, Tywin would likely keep the faith's ambitions neatly in check with a mixture of bribes, threats, and political marriages, ensuring that piety served the state, not the other way around. The stability that Tywin provided, however, would come at a cost. Although peace might seem more attainable on the surface, the underlying tensions in Westeros would not vanish. House Martell's desire for justice over the death of Oberyn would remain potent. They might not openly challenge the crown with Tywin alive, but their hatred would fester. Tywin, likely still dismissive of the Dornish as a serious threat, could make an error by underestimating their quiet fury. The seeds of vengeance would remain planted, only waiting for a moment when Tywin's vigilance slipped or he turned his attention elsewhere. Tyrion's fate is of particular interest in this alternate timeline. If he were captured, Tywin would stand by his initial judgments. A father who nearly ordered his son's death would not be swayed by pleas or tears. Tyrion would face a trial even more conclusively tilted against him. There would be no Martell champion stepping in at this point, no sudden twists of fate. Tywin would see to it that justice, in his eyes, was served. If Tyrion managed to escape the city, perhaps with the assistance of Jaime or a desperate ploy by Varys, he would become a hunted man rather than a free wanderer. Wherever he ended up, he would know that the hand of his father stretched long and cruel across the narrow sea. The Iron Bank of Bravos, which once might have been emboldened to deal more harshly with a weakened crown, would reconsider its position knowing Tywin remained a pillar of strength in the capital. Tywin would ensure that the crown's debts were honored with the same ruthless efficiency he used to settle disputes at home. The bank would recognize that while kings might come and go, Tywin's presence guaranteed a certain financial reliability. This would bolster the crown's credit and eliminate one avenue of instability. Even the uneasy alliance with the Freys, still stained by the horrors of the Red Wedding, would remain stable under Tywin's watchful eye. The Freys, despised by many, would be kept in line by the knowledge that failure to serve Lannister interests would result in their swift removal. Without Tywin's death, the Lannister grip on the Riverlands would remain tighter, delaying or even completely preventing the resurgence of House Tully loyalists. Over time, King Tommen would grow to adulthood under the careful guidance of his grandfather. Instead of the naive and manipulated boy king of one timeline, Tommen could evolve into a more confident but still malleable young ruler. Tywin would mold him into a figurehead who could at least present the facade of stability, while ensuring that real power remained where Tywin wanted it. Cersei, seeing herself overshadowed by her father's authority, might grow more bitter and desperate. Her personal failures would be magnified as she realized that the power she once thought was solely hers to wield was never truly in her own hands. Her relationship with Jaime might sour further as he struggled with his own identity away from the battlefield and the loss of his former glory. Instead of drifting into rash and self-destructive attempts to consolidate power, Cersei would find herself constantly checked by Tywin's presence. The very dynamic of the Lannister family would remain locked in Tywin's stern design. Sansa Stark, held in King's Landing for a time and then spirited away, might find different paths open to her. With Tywin in power, she would understand that subtlety was crucial for survival. She could not rely on the crown's chaos to slip away as easily, nor could she count on the Lannisters turning on one another in the same way. Arya, wandering the countryside, might find the realm more stable and thus more difficult to navigate. A united Westeros under Tywin would crush outlaws and rebels more efficiently, making it both safer and more stifling for those who relied on disorder to remain hidden. The realm as a whole would reflect Tywin's personality: orderly, ruthless, and focused on legacy. The great game would continue, but the rules would be firmer. Without Tywin's death, many of the political upheavals that gave rise to new players would be stalled or prevented entirely. Instead of unraveling, the Lannister hold on the Iron Throne would endure. Over years, this might lead to less immediate strife but a far deeper resentment, as old wounds never received the tumultuous airing that came with the collapse of Lannister power in the original timeline. In short, Tywin's survival would mean the persistence of a particular kind of stability, one that allowed no real healing, only a forced peace under the watchful eye of a man who placed legacy and authority above all else. Tywin's influence would also shape the handling of the Iron Islands, where Balon Greyjoy's ambitions had already begun to wane. Instead of risking open warfare, Tywin might solidify the crown's hold by encouraging a marriage alliance or well-timed military displays intended to deter any rebellious whispers. While the Ironborn were always restless, the presence of Tywin in King's Landing would mean a quicker, more unified response to any future raids. The continent would remain more tightly knit under one political will, preventing opportunistic rebellions from festering too long. The wildlings beyond the wall would face a Night's Watch more likely to receive timely aid. When the Watch called for help, Tywin would not squander time squabbling with other lords. He would recognize that an unstable north was a threat to the crown's peace. Resources would be dispatched more efficiently, ensuring the realm's northern border remained secure. This would accelerate the pacification of the area beyond the wall, potentially shifting the balance of power before any winter horrors fully manifested. Jon Snow, if still at the wall, would find himself dealing with a realm that had no patience for northern chaos. Tywin's logic would dictate that the Night's Watch keep the peace by any means necessary, potentially cutting off the more compassionate paths Jon might have chosen. The uneasy alliances formed at the wall would become more one-sided, with the crown ensuring that the Night's Watch had no reason to negotiate beyond the bare minimum. For the common folk, Tywin's continued presence might mean fewer dramatic upheavals in daily life. Taxes would still be collected, lords would still squabble, but the stability of the crown could prevent prolonged wars that ravaged the countryside. Yet this stability would not bring true peace or prosperity. Instead, it would bring a kind of stasis, where the small folk carried on under a system that offered little hope for betterment. Tywin did not care about being loved, only respected and obeyed, and that attitude would filter down through every level of governance. Within the Red Keep, the whispers and secrets would be more carefully guarded. Servants, guards, and courtiers would know that Tywin's ears were everywhere. The sudden disappearances of those who defied him would serve as cautionary tales. The memory of the short-lived chaos following Joffrey's death would be harnessed to remind everyone that without Tywin, the world would descend into disorder. Tywin's mere presence would compel people to fall in line, and the Red Keep would settle into a stiff, calculating equilibrium. As years passed, the legacy Tywin so cherished would become more tangible. House Lannister would remain the guiding star of King Tommen's reign, shaping policy and ensuring that the family's name remained intertwined with the Iron Throne. Unlike the original course of events, where Lannister fortunes declined over time, this new trajectory would maintain their ascendancy. The realm would learn to fear the Gold Lion banner, not only for its wealth but for the ruthless mind that guided it. Tywin's survival would preserve the old order and suffocate many potential changes that might have emerged from a more fractured political environment. This does not mean that everything would remain static forever. Eventually, Tywin would grow older, and the question of succession would loom large. Tommen would need to step into greater responsibilities. Jaime's role would become more uncertain, as would Cersei's, forever trapped beneath her father's expectations. Tyrion's fate, if he remained at large, could become an irritating shadow that Tywin could never fully stamp out. If Tyrion escaped to Essos, he might work tirelessly to undercut his father's influence, offering his keen mind to rival factions or even whispering into the ears of those who dreamed of toppling the Lannisters. Over time, subtle cracks might form, but they would form very differently than in a world where Tywin's death created an immediate power vacuum. The future involvement of players like Stannis Baratheon would also unfold differently. Without Tywin's death weakening the crown, Stannis might never secure the northern alliances he needed. The threat he posed to the Lannisters would be addressed more aggressively, with Tywin possibly dispatching forces or forging deals to ensure Stannis remained cornered. The complex interplay of magic, prophecy, and the long night ahead would face a realm not easily diverted into chaos. Tywin's realism would lead him to ignore warnings from the distant north. Focusing on maintaining order rather than preparing for threats, he considered little more than old wives' tales. This could have dire implications when true darkness descended, but by then, Tywin's hold might be too ironclad to allow for adaptive responses. In the end, the greatest difference would be the suppression of the opportunities that chaos breeds. In the original course of history, Tywin's death allowed for countless shifts of power, unexpected alliances, and the rise of new leaders. Without that seismic event, the wheel of power in Westeros would turn more slowly. Tywin's hand would keep the realm locked in an equilibrium of fear and compliance. The costs, both human and political, would remain concealed under layers of command and tradition. The legends that might have arisen from broken systems and liberated kingdoms would stay dormant. The heroes of chaos, whether they were underdogs like Tyrion, outsiders like Daenerys, or haunted guardians like Jon Snow, would find fewer cracks in the edifice to exploit. The entire story of Westeros would take a colder, more rigid path. Without Tywin's death, the Seven Kingdoms would remain under the stern gaze of a master statesman who believed unwavering strength could conquer all adversity. He would succeed for a time in holding the realm together with an iron grip. Yet his victory would never taste of triumph. It would be the bitter peace of a world where possibility had been smothered before it could bloom, leaving the future of Westeros bound in the chains of a legacy that refused to relinquish its hold.